First Contact Protocol. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Conclave stretched impossibly wide, its crystal dome capturing starlight from 1,000 distant suns. Ambassador Elena Reyes of Earth stood alone at the entrance, momentarily frozen by the cacophony of alien voices and the kaleidoscope of otherworldly forms that filled the chamber. First time addressing the full assembly, the voice came from Ambassador Tulai, a centaurian whose translucent skin pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. Elena had come to recognize this as a sign of amusement. Is it that obvious? Elena smoothed her formal diplomatic uniform, the midnight blue fabric adorned only with Earth's simple emblem, a stylized globe cradled by olive branches. Your biometric readings are spiking wildly, Tulai replied. Most species can't detect it, but we Centaurians sense these things. Your heart rate suggests either terror or extreme determination. A bit of both, Elena admitted, scanning the chamber where representatives from over 300 spacefaring civilizations conducted the business of galactic governance. Humanity had only gained observer status in the conclave 5 years ago, after Earth's unexpected discovery of faster-than-light travel had forced the galactic community to acknowledge them. Unlike most species who had been gradually introduced to interstellar society over centuries, humans had shocked the established order by independently developing technology that should have been beyond their capabilities. The resulting diplomatic friction had been Elena's problem since the day she was appointed. The assembly quieted as Supreme Overseer Krell of the Veldaran Empire took the central podium. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, with an exoskeleton of burnished copper-like plates and multiple limbs that moved with unsettling precision, Krell dominated any space he occupied. The Veldarans had ruled the conclave for millennia, their technological superiority and vast territorial holdings giving them effective control over galactic policies. Representatives of the civilized species, Krell began, his translator converting his clicking speech into the standardized conclave lingua franca. We convene today to address matters of significant concern to our shared prosperity and security. Elena's neural implant vibrated subtly against her temple, a priority message from her aide, Devon Chen, who monitored conclave communications from their embassy quarters. They're moving the classification vote forward, Devon's voice whispered directly into her auditory nerve. It's happening today, not next cycle as scheduled. Elena felt her blood turn cold. The classification vote would determine humanity's official status within the conclave hierarchy. For months, she had been fighting against the Veldaran-led initiative to designate humans as a supervised species, effectively placing Earth and all human colonies under direct Veldaran oversight. Item 17. Krell continued, confirming Devon's warning. Reclassification of emergent species status for designation Sol 3 inhabitants, commonly referred to as humans. Elena activated her diplomatic channel, sending the emergency signal to Captain Sato aboard the diplomatic vessel Prometheus, currently docked at the conclave station. One short pulse, one long. The prearranged code that meant their contingency plan needed activation. The assessment committee has completed its evaluation of human technological development, resource management, and cultural stability. Krell's voice echoed through the chamber. Based on comprehensive analysis, the committee recommends classification as a Category 3 civilization, requiring supervisory protocols and technology restrictions. Category 3. Elena clenched her jaw. Such a designation would place humanity under direct Veldaran control, with restricted travel rights, mandatory technology monitoring, and resource-sharing requirements that amounted to legalized plunder of Earth's colonies. The Overseer conveniently fails to mention that humans have satisfied every benchmark for Category 1 status. Tulai whispered beside her. This is unprecedented, even for the Veldarans. Elena had expected this. For 3 years, she had watched the Veldarans systematically undermine human diplomatic efforts, restrict their trade relationships, and spread disinformation about Earth throughout the conclave. What she hadn't expected was how quickly they would move to formalize humanity's subordinate status. I request recognition to address the assembly, Elena announced, her voice carrying through the chamber's acoustic enhancement field. Krell's upper limbs twitched in what Elena had learned to recognize as irritation. The Earth representative may make a brief statement before the vote proceeds. Elena walked calmly to the central speaking platform, acutely aware of the thousands of alien eyes tracking her movement. Her neural implant vibrated again, Captain Sato confirming receipt of her signal. The pieces were now in motion. Esteemed representatives of the conclave, Elena began. I come before you today, not merely to contest this classification vote, but to present evidence of systematic corruption within the very foundation of our galactic governance. A ripple of multilingual murmurs swept through the assembly. Krell's exoskeleton plates shifted to a darker hue, a Veldaran sign of anger. This is not the approved topic for your statement, Ambassador Reyes, Krell interrupted. You will confine your remarks to the classification matter only. Elena smiled thinly. The classification matter is precisely what I'm addressing, Overseer. Specifically, how the Veldaran Empire has manipulated conclave protocols to suppress emergent species who might challenge their dominance. She gestured to the massive holographic display above the assembly floor. On cue, courtesy of Devon's remote access, the display filled with documents and data streams, internal Veldaran communications that Elena's team had spent years collecting through methods the conclave would certainly consider undiplomatic. These records detail the deliberate suppression of 17 different species over the past century alone. Elena continued as the assembly erupted in shock. Technologies confiscated, development stunted, resources appropriated, all under the guise of supervisory protocols that this body has rubber-stamped without question. This is an outrage, Krell thundered, his translator struggling to convey the multiple harmonic tones of Veldaran fury. Security, remove the human representative and terminate this unauthorized display. The conclave security forces, primarily Veldaran allied species, moved toward Elena, but she stood her ground. The holographic display shifted again, now showing footage of Veldaran military vessels systematically destroying an uninhabited planet rich with rare minerals that had been designated as a protected scientific preserve. Is this the oversight we're meant to trust? Elena's voice rose above the growing chaos. The same empire that violated the sanctuary protocols last month at Kepler 452 bits, destroying an entire ecosystem to mine crystalline thorium, when they thought no one was watching. The security forces hesitated, their attention split between their duty and the damning images above them. The assembly had dissolved into a cacophony of outraged voices and demands for explanation. Elena's implant vibrated once more. This time, it was a message that made her smile despite the gravity of the moment. Neural net deployed. All conclave systems accessible. Awaiting your command. The human makes baseless accusations, Krell declared, moving toward Elena with alarming speed. This assembly will disregard these fabricated. He stopped mid-sentence as every light in the vast chamber simultaneously dimmed, then brightened to a harsh intensity. The holographic display fragmented into thousands of smaller screens, each showing different secured Veldaran communications, military directives, and classified conclave decisions that had been made without the knowledge of the full assembly. What you're witnessing, Elena announced to the stunned gathering, is what happens when you underestimate a species that evolved on a death world, survived their own nuclear age, and developed faster than light travel despite being told it was impossible. The massive doors to the assembly chamber slid open, and Captain Sato entered, accompanied by representatives from 7 other species, all of whom had suffered under Veldaran supervision in previous centuries. They formed a line behind Elena, a visual statement of solidarity that needed no translation. Humanity rejects your classification, Elena said, her voice eerily calm as she locked eyes with Krell. And we are not alone in questioning the Veldaran right to determine the destiny of other species. The assembly erupted into pandemonium as Elena activated the final phase of their plan. Throughout the conclave station and across the linked communications network spanning dozens of star systems, the carefully crafted human algorithm began its work, not destroying, but revealing. Every classified directive, every secret agreement, every hidden exploitation was suddenly accessible to all conclave members. In the chaos that followed, Alina stood immovable at the center of the storm she had unleashed, watching as millennia of carefully constructed Veldaran control began to unravel in real time before the assembled representatives of the galaxy. The first contact protocol had never accounted for this scenario. What happens when the newest species in the galactic community refuses to play by rules designed to ensure their submission? The galaxy was about to find out. The gambit begins. The Conclave's emergency session entered its fourth hour as Alina Reyes stood at the center of the diplomatic maelstrom she had created. Supreme Overseer Krell loomed before her, his exoskeleton now a deep crimson, the Veldaran biological response to extreme stress and rage. You have committed an act of information terrorism against the legitimate governance of the Conclave. Krell's resonant voice carried the formal tones used for delivering judgments. The penalties for such actions include immediate revocation of your species observer status and potential quarantine of your home system. Alina had expected this response. The Veldarans had maintained power for millennia through a careful balance of technological superiority and information control. She had just shattered the latter. I've simply provided transparency, Alina replied, her voice amplified throughout the chamber. If sharing truth constitutes terrorism in the Conclave, perhaps that speaks more to the nature of this body's governance than to my actions. The assembly remained in an uproar, with various species representatives forming impromptu discussion clusters across the chamber floor. The Veldaran delegation had physically surrounded Krell, their communication limbs moving in the complex patterns that indicated intense private exchanges. Alina's neural implant vibrated with an incoming transmission from Captain Sato. Phase 2 initialized. Human ships at Proxima Centauri, Tau Ceti, and Trappist have activated their systems. The Veldaran monitoring stations went dark exactly 47 seconds ago. This was the most dangerous part of their plan. While Alina kept the Conclave leadership distracted with her diplomatic confrontation, human forces were systematically neutralizing the network of surveillance and weapons platforms the Veldarans had secretly installed near Earth's colony worlds. The Assembly will review these allegations through proper channels, announced Sub-Matriarch Tinala of the Morigi Confederation, the most senior non-Veldaran member of the Conclave's Executive Council. Her avian features remained composed, but the rapid flutter of her throat sacs betrayed her agitation. Until such review is complete, we propose a temporary recess. There will be no recess, Alina countered immediately. Not while Veldaran battle groups are currently moving toward human space. She gestured, and the main holographic display shifted to show real-time tracking data of Veldaran military vessels changing course toward Earth's colonies. Gasps and clicks of surprise echoed through the chamber. Supreme Overseer, Alina addressed Krell directly. Perhaps you'd like to explain why your empire mobilized its 3rd and 5th battle groups toward human territory, 6 hours before this classification vote was even announced. Krell's upper limbs performed a complex gesture that Alina's diplomatic training identified as the Veldaran equivalent of dismissal. Standard security protocols when dealing with potentially unstable species. The movements are purely precautionary. 300 warships as a precaution. Alina raised an eyebrow. Your own Conclave regulations limit security responses to no more than 20 vessels without full council approval. The chamber had grown quieter now, representatives focusing on this direct confrontation between human and Veldaran. Alina felt the weight of countless alien gazes upon her, some curious, others alarmed, and more than a few hopeful. Ambassador Reyes. Tinala interjected, her tone carefully measured. These are serious allegations that require. A Veldaran communication officer rushed to Krell's side, interrupting the sub-matriarch. The officer's carapace was pale gray, the Veldaran equivalent of ashen-faced horror. Whatever message he delivered caused Krell's secondary limbs to spasm involuntarily. "What have you done?" Krell's voice had lost its formal cadence, the translator struggling to capture the mixture of rage and dismay. Elena received another neural message from Captain Sato. "All targets neutralized. 0 casualties as ordered. Their systems are locked down with our encryption, awaiting your signal for Phase 3. She allowed herself a small smile. "We've merely protected ourselves, Overseer. Your monitoring stations and weapons platforms in human territory have been temporarily deactivated. Your ships can still retreat safely, but they can no longer threaten our worlds." The assembly erupted again. The existence of these Veldaran military installations in human territory had never been officially acknowledged to the Conclave. "This is an act of war," Krell declared, advancing toward Elena until he towered directly over her. Elena didn't flinch. "No, Overseer. An act of war would be destroying your installations and ships. We've simply suspended their operation. All Veldaran personnel are unharmed. Their life support systems remain functioning. We've even left their communication channels open so they can call for evacuation." The technical achievement this represented wasn't lost on the more technologically advanced species in the assembly. The Veldarans had long claimed their military systems were impenetrable, a claim that had just been dramatically disproven. How? The question came not from Krell, but from Ziv Tannen, the multiformed representative of the Cascadian technocracy. "Veldaran quantum-locked systems cannot be remotely accessed. It's theoretically impossible." Elena turned to address the broader assembly rather than answering directly. "For 3 years, we've watched the Veldarans systematically work to contain and control humanity. They believed we were too primitive to recognize their actions, too unsophisticated to counter their technology." She paused, allowing her next words to carry weight. "But humans have one trait that has consistently been underestimated throughout our history. When cornered, we innovate at an exponential rate." On cue, Devon activated the next stage of their presentation. The holographic display showed a series of technical specifications for a new form of quantum interface technology that Earth had developed, technology that shouldn't have been possible for a Category 3 civilization. While the Veldarans were busy trying to restrict our official development, we were busy in the background. Elena continued. "Not building weapons, not creating fleets, but understanding the fundamental principles of information systems at a level the Conclave has yet to explore." Krell's translator couldn't fully capture the complex harmonics of his response, but the rage was unmistakable. "You have violated dozens of Conclave technology protocols. This confirms the necessity of your reclassification and supervision." "Does it?" Elena countered. "Or does it reveal that your classification system exists not to protect developing species, but to control them, to ensure no one develops technologies that might challenge Veldaran dominance?" She turned to address the assembly directly. "Ask yourselves, if humans develop these capabilities in just 3 years of limited conclave contact, what might the Feluthians have accomplished without centuries of supervision? Or the Dorishi? Or any of the 17 other species whose development has been artificially stunted by Veldaran intervention?" The representatives of those mentioned species shifted uncomfortably, their various physiologies displaying signs that Elena had spent months learning to recognize as contemplation and realization. Krell moved to retake control of the situation. "This assembly will not be manipulated by a newcomer species that clearly demonstrates the very instability we sought to manage. I call for an immediate security response and suspension of all human conclave privileges." Several Veldaran-allied species murmured agreement, but others remained conspicuously silent. The traditional power blocks of the conclave were fracturing before everyone's eyes. Elena received another neural message, this one from the human research station at Proxima Centauri. "Veldaran Battle Group has halted advance. They appear to be attempting manual overrides of their systems. Estimated time until they regain partial control: 6 hours. She had a window, and she intended to use it. Members of the Conclave, Elena addressed the assembly with renewed confidence. Humanity did not come here to dismantle your institution. We came seeking fair inclusion in the galactic community. What we discovered instead was a system designed to maintain hierarchies of power rather than foster mutual development. She gestured, and a holographic display shifted again, now showing a complex network diagram representing information flows throughout the conclave's connected systems. Certain nodes, primarily Velderan, glowed brighter than others, demonstrating their disproportionate access and control. This is the actual structure of decision-making in our supposed equal assembly, Elena explained. Notice how information flows through Velderan filters before reaching most member species. Notice how certain data streams are entirely diverted from specific members. The assembly had grown silent, representatives from dozens of worlds confronting visual evidence of disparities many had suspected, but never been able to confirm. The Velderan control of this body is not maintained through their superior wisdom or natural authority, Elena continued, but through systematically restricting access to information and technology. Today, that system ends. With perfect dramatic timing, rehearsed extensively with Devon and Captain Sato, the massive holographic display split into thousands of data streams that flowed outward to each representative's personal interface. What you're receiving, Elena explained as confusion and shock rippled through the assembly, is unrestricted access to all conclave information systems, including those previously classified as Velderan Imperial Security Matters. For the first time in perhaps 1,000 years, every species in this chamber has equal access to the knowledge that shapes our shared galaxy. Krell lunged forward, his massive form suddenly threatening. You will terminate this transmission immediately. This is a violation of security protocols that protect all conclave species. Are they protecting all species, Overseer? Elena stood her ground despite the Velderan towering over her. Or just yours? Before Krell could respond, his communication officer approached again, even more agitated than before. Whatever news he delivered caused Krell's entire exoskeleton to momentarily lose its rigid structure, the Velderan equivalent of weakened knees. Elena knew what the message contained before Krell did. Phase 3 had begun. Throughout conclave space, carefully planted human quantum interfaces were activating, systematically dismantling the hidden hierarchies in the information network that had kept the Velderans in control for millennia. The gambit was fully in play now. There was no turning back. Chains of command. The Grand Assembly Hall had transformed from an orderly diplomatic venue into something approaching controlled chaos. Species representatives who had never directly communicated with each other were now engaged in intense discussions, sharing information that had been previously filtered through Velderan channels. The power dynamics of millennia were shifting in real time. Elena watched as Supreme Overseer Krell conferred urgently with his senior advisors, their communication limbs moving in increasingly agitated patterns. The Velderan delegation was fracturing under pressure, exactly as Elena had predicted. Situation update. Captain Seto's voice came through her neural implant. Velderan command ships are attempting to establish new communication protocols to bypass our quantum interference. We're countering each attempt, but they're adaptive. Our timeline may be shorter than anticipated. Elena acknowledged with a subtle gesture, then returned her attention to the assembly. The initial shock was wearing off, and the various factions of the conclave were beginning to coalesce into new alliances before her eyes. Sub-matriarch Tinala approached Elena, her avian features unreadable to most but displaying what Elena recognized as cautious respect. You have taken an extraordinary risk, Ambassador Reyes, Tinala said quietly. The Moridi have suspected Velderan information manipulation for centuries, but we lack the means to confirm it without triggering imperial reprisals. That's the advantage of being underestimated, Elena replied. The Velderans never bothered to conceal their manipulations from us because they didn't believe we could understand them, let alone counter them. Tinala's throat sacs pulsed in the pattern that indicated agreement. Nevertheless, you have ignited a conflagration that may consume us all. The The Veldaran Empire controls 70% of the Conclave's combined military assets. Military assets that suddenly find themselves unable to communicate with their command structure, Elena pointed out. Or hadn't you noticed? The sub-matriarch's compound eyes widened. You've disrupted the Veldaran military communication network. That's impossible. Elena smiled. That word has never stopped humans before. Across the chamber, Krell had apparently reached a decision. He ascended to the central platform, his massive form drawing immediate attention despite the ongoing chaos. This assembly is suspended by emergency protocol. His amplified voice thundered through the chamber. All representatives will return to their official residences until order can be restored. The human delegation is hereby detained pending investigation into violations of Conclave security protocols. Elena had expected this. The Veldaran's playbook was predictable. When control was threatened, they invoked security concerns to reassert authority. She stepped forward. I invoke Article 7 of the Conclave Charter. No representative may be detained without a full assembly vote when presenting evidence of charter violations by a governing body. Krell's upper limbs performed the gesture of dismissal again. Article 7 applies to recognized member species, not observers. Security, escort the human delegation to containment. The Conclave security forces, primarily Veldaran allied species with enhanced physical capabilities, moved to surround Elena and her team. This was the moment of greatest danger in their plan. I suggest you check the membership logs, Overseer, Elena replied calmly. As of 26 minutes ago, humanity's status was upgraded from observer to full member by unanimous vote of the membership committee. Chains of command. The Grand Assembly Hall had transformed from an orderly diplomatic venue into something approaching controlled chaos. Species representatives who had never directly communicated with each other were now engaged in intense discussions, sharing information that had been previously filtered through Veldaran channels. The power dynamics of millennia were shifting in real time. Elena watched as Supreme Overseer Krell conferred urgently with his senior advisors, their communication limbs moving in increasingly agitated patterns. The Veldaran delegation was fracturing under pressure, exactly as Elena had predicted. Situation update. Captain Sato's voice came through her neural implant. Veldaran command ships are attempting to establish new communication protocols to bypass our quantum interference. We're countering each attempt, but they're adaptive. Our timeline may be shorter than anticipated. Elena acknowledged with a subtle gesture, then returned her attention to the assembly. The initial shock was wearing off, and the various factions of the Conclave were beginning to coalesce into new alliances before her eyes. Sub-matriarch Tinala approached Elena, her avian features unreadable to most but displaying what Elena recognized as cautious respect. You have taken an extraordinary risk, Ambassador Reyes, Tinala said quietly. The Moridi have suspected Veldaran information manipulation for centuries, but we lacked the means to confirm it without triggering imperial reprisals. That's the advantage of being underestimated, Elena replied. The Veldarans never bothered to conceal their manipulations from us because they didn't believe we could understand them, let alone counter them. Tinala's throat sacs pulsed in the pattern that indicated agreement. Nevertheless, you have ignited a conflagration that may consume us all. The Veldaran Empire controls 70% of the Conclave's combined military assets. Military assets that suddenly find themselves unable to communicate with their command structure, Elena pointed out. Or hadn't you noticed? The sub-matriarch's compound eyes widened. You've disrupted the Veldaran military communication network. That's impossible. Elena smiled. That word has never stopped humans before. Across the chamber, Krell had apparently reached a decision. He ascended to the central platform, his massive form drawing immediate attention despite the ongoing chaos. This assembly is suspended by emergency protocol. His amplified voice thundered through the chamber. All representatives will return to their official residences until order can be restored. The human delegation is hereby detained pending investigation into violations of Conclave security protocols. Elena had expected this. The Veldorans' playbook was predictable. When control was threatened, they invoked security concerns to reassert authority. She stepped forward. I invoke Article 7 of the Conclave Charter. No representative may be detained without a full assembly vote when presenting evidence of charter violations by a governing body. Krell's upper limbs performed the gesture of dismissal again. Article 7 applies to recognized member species, not observers. Security, escort the human delegation to containment. The Conclave's security forces, primarily Veldoran allied species with enhanced physical capabilities, moved to surround Alina and her team. This was the moment of greatest danger in their plan. I suggest you check the membership logs, Overseer, Alina replied calmly. As of 26 minutes ago, humanity's status was upgraded from observer to full member by unanimous vote of the membership committee. Confusion rippled through the assembly. The membership committee hadn't convened in weeks. Impossible, Krell declared. The committee has made no such decision. Actually, came a new voice. We did. All attention turned to Delegate Ziv Tannen of the Cascadian Technocracy, chair of the membership committee. The delegate's multiformed body rippled as it moved toward the central platform. Upon reviewing the unfiltered data about human development and contributions, data previously withheld from my committee by Veldoran Information Controls, we conducted an emergency remote session and voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership status. Ziv's voice modulated through its complex vocal apparatus. The records are available for all to review in the newly transparent information system. Alina suppressed a smile. This wasn't part of her original plan. It was better. The other species were beginning to act independently, making their own decisions based on unfiltered information. Krell's exoskeleton had darkened to a deep burgundy, approaching the color spectrum that indicated dangerous levels of stress in Veldorans. This is procedurally invalid. Committee votes require physical presence and imperial oversight. According to whose regulations? Ziv countered. The original Conclave Charter, which we've all now had a chance to read in its unredacted form, specifically permits remote voting in extraordinary circumstances. It seems the imperial procedural requirements were later additions not approved by the full assembly. More species representatives were moving to stand with Alina now, physically demonstrating their shift in allegiance. The security forces hesitated, uncertain whose orders to follow in this unprecedented situation. Alina's neural implant vibrated with an urgent message from Devon. Veldoran military channels showing signs of recovery. Estimated 43 minutes until they bypass our countermeasures. She needed to move faster. Alina stepped forward to address the full assembly. Members of the conclave, I did not come here to dismantle your institution or to challenge the Veldoran people. I came to ensure humanity's rightful place among the stars, a place threatened by systemic corruption that has affected not just humans, but dozens of species. She gestured to her left, where Captain Sato had quietly assembled representatives from the species who had suffered most under Veldoran oversight. The Feluthians, whose medical technology was appropriated and then sold back to them at exorbitant rates. The Doreshi, whose mineral-rich worlds were stripped under the guise of development assistance. The Xiati, who were told their psionic abilities were dangerous myths, while the Veldorans secretly studied and weaponized them. Each named species representative stepped forward as Alina spoke, their diverse physiologies united in their experience of exploitation. Today is not about humanity demanding special treatment, Alina continued. It's about all of us. Every species represented in this chamber, demanding the equality promised in the original Conclave Charter. Krell had recovered his composure somewhat, his exoskeleton gradually returning to its normal copper hue. These theatrical displays do not change strategic realities, Ambassador Reyes. When our systems fully recover, and they will, the consequences for this disruption will be severe. The Veldoran Empire has maintained peace in this galaxy for millennia. Would you risk that peace for your species' pride? It was the question Alina had been waiting for. She turned to directly face Krell, deliberately keeping her posture non-threatening despite the tension in the chamber. Is it truly peace, Overseer, when it's maintained through suppression? When species are denied their potential? When technology that could benefit billions is restricted to maintain power imbalances? She took a step closer to the massive Velderan. And let's be honest about those strategic realities. Your systems won't recover in time. The quantum entanglement protocols we've implemented aren't something you can simply override with conventional methods. Krell's communication officer approached again, and whatever message he delivered caused the Overseer's limbs to momentarily freeze in the Velderan gesture of profound shock. Elena knew what the message contained. Throughout Velderan space, their supposedly secured military installations were experiencing cascading system failures as the human quantum interface technology systematically neutralized their command and control capabilities. "What have you done?" Krell demanded, his translator struggling to capture the mix of outrage and disbelief in his harmonic speech. "We've leveled the playing field," Elena replied simply. "Your weapons remain intact. Your ships are undamaged. Your personnel are safe. But your ability to project imperial power throughout the galaxy has been temporarily suspended." She emphasized the word temporarily, while gesturing to the main holographic display, which now showed a countdown clock. 24 hours. In exactly 24 hours, all affected systems will automatically restore to normal function, Elena explained to the assembly. This isn't a military coup. It's simply a pause, a chance for this body to reform itself without imperial coercion. The assembly erupted in a mixture of reactions: alarm, relief, excitement, fear, all expressed through the diverse communication methods of dozens of species. Elena had created something unprecedented in conclave history, a power vacuum with a precise expiration date. Sub-Matriarch Hinella moved to the central platform. "I propose an emergency session of the full assembly to draft reforms to conclave governance, effective immediately." "I second this proposal," called out Ambassador Xoril of the Dorashi Collective, their crystalline form refracting light in patterns indicating strong emotion. More voices joined in support, creating a momentum that even the Velderan delegation couldn't ignore. Krell found himself increasingly isolated as former allies, freed from information control and military intimidation, began to distance themselves from imperial leadership. Elena's neural implant vibrated with a message from Captain Sato that made her breath catch. Velderan's secondary fleet detected approaching conclave station. Intentions unclear. Estimated arrival: 37 minutes. The chains of command were breaking, but the situation remained dangerously unstable. Elena had calculated that the Velderans would be too paralyzed by the systemic failure to mount an effective military response within the window she created, but she hadn't accounted for individual commanders acting on their own initiative. She needed to conclude this confrontation before military forces arrived and changed the equation. Elena caught Captain Seto's eye across the chamber and gave a subtle nod, the signal to implement the contingency they had prepared for this exact scenario. As the assembly descended into procedural debates over how to structure the emergency reform session, Elena quietly approached Krell, who stood somewhat apart from the main proceedings, conferring with his increasingly agitated advisors. "Supreme Overseer," she said softly, pitched for his auditory organs alone, "I think it's time we spoke privately about how this transition of power proceeds, for everyone's benefit." Krell's upper limbs performed a dismissive gesture. "You presume much, human. This temporary disruption does not constitute a transition of power." "Perhaps not," Elena agreed. "But the Velderan battle group approaching this station at high velocity might create a more permanent disruption if we don't resolve this peacefully." Krell's exoskeleton rippled in the pattern indicating surprise. "How could you possibly know?" "The same way we accessed your other systems," Elena interrupted. "Now, shall we discuss terms that preserve Velderan dignity while allowing necessary reforms? Or shall we wait for your commanders to arrive and potentially turn this political revolution into something far bloodier?" For the first time since their confrontation began, Supreme Overseer Krell of the Veldaran Empire regarded Ambassador Elena Reyes of Earth not as an inferior being to be managed, but as an equal to be negotiated with. The chains of command that had bound the galaxy for millennia were breaking. What would replace them remained to be seen. Silent Revolution. The private conference chamber adjacent to the Grand Assembly Hall felt unusually small, with Supreme Overseer Krell's massive form occupying nearly a quarter of the available space. Elena Reyes sat across from him, Captain Sato standing attentively behind her chair. The only other beings present were two of Krell's senior advisors and a single neutral observer, Sub-Matriarch Tanala, whose Morigi impartiality was respected even by the Veldarans. "Your demonstration has made your point, Ambassador," Krell began, his translator rendering his harmonic speech in carefully measured tones. "The Veldaran Empire acknowledges that certain procedural oversights may have occurred in the governance of the Conclave." Elena allowed herself a small diplomatic smile. Procedural oversights was about as close to an admission of systematic corruption as she was likely to get from the Veldaran leader. However, Krell continued, his upper limbs moving in the patterns that indicated formal diplomatic discourse. "The approaching Veldaran Defense Force cannot be remotely disabled using the same methods you employed against our other installations. They operate on isolated command protocols specifically designed to function during communication disruptions." "We're aware of that," Elena replied calmly. "Which is why Captain Sato has been in direct communication with Fleet Commander Vex of your approaching battle group." Krell's exoskeletal plates shifted in the pattern indicating surprise. "That's impossible. Commander Vex would never communicate with a lesser species." Elena finished for him. "Perhaps not under normal circumstances. But these are hardly normal circumstances, are they?" She gestured, and Captain Sato activated a holographic projection showing his recent communication with the Veldaran fleet commander, a stunned-looking officer receiving visual evidence of the system-wide failures affecting Veldaran military installations. "Commander Vex has agreed to maintain position outside the diplomatic exclusion zone until our negotiations conclude," Elena explained. "He's a practical officer who recognizes the need for a diplomatic solution when facing an adversary with unknown capabilities." Krell's primary communication limbs performed a complex gesture that Elena's diplomatic training identified as reluctant acceptance. "What are your demands?" "Not demands," Elena corrected gently. "Proposals for reform." "There's a difference." She activated her own holographic display, showing a document that had been meticulously prepared over the past 3 years, ever since humanity had first discovered the true nature of Veldaran control over the Conclave. First, the reformation of the Conclave's information infrastructure to ensure equal access for all member species, Elena began. Second, the establishment of an oversight committee with rotating membership to prevent any single species from controlling critical systems. Third, technology-sharing protocols that allow emerging civilizations to develop without artificial restrictions. She continued through the list of proposed reforms, each one carefully designed to dismantle Veldaran hegemony without explicitly humiliating the Empire or threatening its legitimate interests. Throughout her presentation, Krell remained unnaturally still, a sign of intense concentration in Veldarans. When she finished, Tanala spoke for the first time since the private meeting began. "These proposals appear designed to restore the original intent of the Conclave Charter. As a neutral observer, I find them reasonable starting points for negotiation." Krell's exoskeleton had gradually shifted to a deep bronze color, the Veldaran physiological response to intense strategic calculation. "Your species has existed in the galactic community for less than a decade," he said finally. "Yet you presume